While Apollos was in Corinth, Shaul completed his travels through the inland country and arrived at Ephesus, where he found a few Talmudim. He asked them, "Did you receive the Ruach HaKodesh when you came to trust?" "No," they said to him. We have never even heard that there was such a thing as the Ruach HaKodesh." In this case, he said, into what were you immersed?" "The immersion of Yochanan," they answered. Shaul said, "Yochanan practiced an immersion in connection with turning from sin into God. But he told the people to put their trust in the one who would come after him, that is, in Yeshua." On hearing this, they were immersed into the name of the Lord Yeshua. And when Shaul placed his hands on them, the Ruach HaKodesh came upon them, so that they began speaking in tongues and prophesying. In all, there were about 12 of these men. Shaul went into the synagogue, and for 3 months he spoke out boldly, engaging in dialogue and trying to persuade people of the kingdom of God. But some began hardening themselves and refusing to listen. And when they started defaming the way before the whole synagogue, Shaul withdrew, took the Talmudim with him, and commenced holding daily dialogues in Tyrannus' yeshiva. This went on for 2 years, so that everyone, both Jews and Greeks, living in the province of Asia, heard the message about the Lord. God did extraordinary miracles through Shaul. For instance, handkerchiefs and aprons that had touched him were brought to sick people. They would recover from their ailments, and the evil spirits would leave them. Then some of the Jewish exorcists who traveled from place to place tried to make use of the name of the Lord Yeshua in connection with the people who had evil spirits. They would say, "I exorcise you in the name of Yeshua that Shaul is proclaiming." One time, 7 sons of the Jewish Kohen Haggadol named Shvika were doing this, and the evil spirit answered them. It said, "Yeshua I know, Shaul I recognize, but you, who are you?" The man with the evil spirit fell upon them, overpowered them, and gave them such a beating that they ran from the house naked and bleeding. When all this became known to the residents of Ephesus, fear fell on them. Jews and Greeks alike, in the name of the Lord Yeshua, came to be held in high regard. Many of those who had earlier made professions of faith now came and admitted publicly their evil deeds, and a considerable number of those who had engaged in occult practices threw their scrolls in a pile and burned them in public. When they calculated the value of the scrolls, it came to 50,000 drachmas. Thus the message about the Lord continued a powerful way to grow in influence. Sometime later, Shaul decided by the Spirit to pass through Macedonia and Achaia, and then go to Jerusalem. After I had been there, he said, "I must visit Rome." So he dispatched 2 of his helpers, Timothy and Aristus, to Macedonia, but he himself remained in the province of Asia for a while. It was at this time that a major furor arose concerning the way. There was a silversmith named Demetrius who manufactured from silver objects connected with the worship of the goddess Artemis, and he provided a no small amount of work for the craftsmen. He called a meeting to them and those engaged in similar trades and said, "Men, you understand that this line of business provides us a living. You can see and hear for yourselves that not only here in Ephesus, but in practically the whole province of Asia, this Shaul has convinced and turned away a considerable crowd by saying that man-made gods aren't gods at all. Now, the danger is not only that the reputation of our trade will suffer, but that the temple of the great goddess Artemis will come to be taken lightly. It would end up that the goddess herself, who is worshipped throughout the whole province of Asia, is indeed throughout the whole world being ignominiously brought down from her divine majesty." Hearing this, they were filled with rage and began bellowing, "Great is Artemis of Ephesus!" Soon the whole city was in an uproar. As one man, the mob rushed into the theater, dragged along Gaius and Aristarchus, Shaul's traveling companions from Macedonia. Shaul himself wanted to appear before the crowd, but the Talmudim wouldn't let him. Even some of the officials of the province, friends of his, sent a message begging him not to risk entering the theater. Meanwhile, some were shouting one thing and the others else because the assembly was in complete confusion. The great majority didn't even know why they were there. Some of the crowd explained the situation to Alexander, whom the Jews had pushed to the front, so Alexander motioned for silence, hoping to make the defense speech of the people. But as soon as they recognized that he was a Jew, they began bellowing in unison, "Great is Artemis, the Ephesians, of the Ephesians." They kept it up for about 2 hours. At last, the city clerk was able to quiet the crowd. Men of Ephesus, he said, is there anyone who doesn't know that the city of Ephesus is a guardian of the temple of the great Artemis, the sacred stone which fell from the sky? Since this is beyond dispute, you are better calm down and not do anything rash. For you have brought these men here who have neither robbed the temple nor insulted your goddess. So if Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen have a complaint against anyone, the courts are open and the judges are there. Let them bring charges and countercharges. But if there is something more you want, it must be settled in a lawful assembly. For we are in danger of being accused of rioting on account of what has happened today. There is no justification for it. And if we were asked, we would be unable to give any reasonable explanation for this disorderly gathering. And with these words, he dismissed the assembly. After the furor died down, Shaul sent for his Talmudim and encouraged them, then took his leave and set on his way for Macedonia. He went through that area and, after saying much to encourage them, passed on to Greece, where he spent 3 months. As he was preparing to set sail for Syria, he discovered a plot against him by the unbelieving Jews. So he changed his mind and decided to return to Macedonia. Sopater from Berea, the son of Paras, accompanied him, as did Aristarchus and Secundus from Thessalonica, Gaius and Debre and Timothy, Tychus and Trophimus from the province of Asia. These men went on and waited for us in Troas while we set sail from Philippi. After the days of Matzah, 5 days later, we met them in Troas, where we spent a week. On Matzah Shabbat, we were gathered to break bread. Shaul addressed them, since he was going to leave the next day. He kept talking until midnight. Now there were many oil lamps burning in the upstairs room where we were meeting, and there was a young fellow named Eutychus sitting at the windowsill. After Shaul's drash went on and on, Eutychus grew sleepier and sleepier, till finally he went to sleep and fell from the 3rd story to the ground. When they picked him up, he was dead. But Shaul went down, threw himself on him, put his arms around him, and said, "Don't be upset. He's alive." Then he went back upstairs, broke bread, and ate. He continued talking with them till daylight, then left. So greatly relieved, they brought the boy home alive. We went on ahead to the ship and set sail for Assos, where we were planning to take Shaul aboard. He had arranged this because he wanted to get there by land after he met us in Assos. We took him aboard and went up to Mytilene. Next day, we sailed for there and arrived in Chios. The following day, we crossed over to Samos, and the day after that, we reached Miletus, for Shaul had decided to bypass Ephesus on his voyage in order to avoid losing time in the province of Asia, because he was hurrying to get to Jerusalem, if possible, in time to celebrate Shavuot. But he did send from Miletus to Ephesus, summoning the elders of the Messianic community. When they arrived, he said to them, "You yourselves know how from the first day I set foot in the province of Asia, I was with you the whole time, serving the Lord with much humility and with tears, in spite of the tests I had to undergo because of the plots of the unbelieving Jews. You know that I held back nothing that could be helpful to you, and that I taught you both public and from house to house, declaring with utmost seriousness the same message to Jews and Greeks alike. Turn from your sin to God and put your trust in our Lord Yeshua the Messiah. And now, compelled by the Spirit, I'm going to Jerusalem. I don't know what will happen to me there, other than that in every city the Ruach HaKodesh keeps warning me that imprisonment and persecution await me. But I consider my own life of no importance to me whatsoever, as long as I can finish the course ahead of me, the task I received from the Lord Yeshua to declare the depth of the good news of God's love and kindness. Now listen, I know that none of you people among whom I have gone about proclaiming the kingdom will ever see me again. Therefore, I testify on this day that I am innocent of blood of all. For I did not shrink from proclaiming to you the whole plan of God. Watch out for yourselves and for all the flock in which the Ruach HaKodesh has placed you as leaders, to shepherd God's messianic community, which he won for himself at the cost of his own son's blood. I know that after I leave, savage wolves will come in among you, and they won't spare the flock, even from among your own number. Men will arise and teach perversions of the truth in order to drag away the Talmudim after themselves. So stay alert. Remember that for 3 years, night and day, with tears in my eyes, I never stopped warning you. Now I entrust you to take care of the Lord and to the message of his love and kindness, for it can build you up and give you an inheritance among all those who have been set apart for God. I have not wanted for myself anyone's silver or gold or clothing, for you yourselves know that these hands of mine have provided not only for my own needs, but for the needs of my co-workers as well. In everything I have given you an example of how, by working hard like this, you must help the weak. Remember the words of the Lord Yeshua himself, there is more happiness in giving than in receiving. When he had finished speaking, Shaul kneeled down with them and prayed. They were all in tears as they threw their arms around his neck and kissed him farewell. What saddened them the most was that his remark that they would never see him again. Then they accompanied him to the ship. After we had torn ourselves away from Ephesus' elders, we set sail and made straight run to Kos. Next day we went to Rhodes, and from there went to Patara. On finding a ship that was crossing over to Phoenicia, we embarked and set sail. After setting Cyprus, we passed on to the left, sailed to Syria, and landed in Zor, because that was where the ship was unloading its cargo. Having searched out the Talmudim there, we remained for a week, guided by the Spirit. They told Shaul not to go up to Jerusalem, but when the week was over, we left to continue our journey. All of them, with their wives and children, accompanied us until we were outside the town, kneeling on the beach and praying. We said goodbye to each other, then we boarded the ship, and they returned home. When the voyage from Zor was over, we arrived in Platamas. There we greeted the brothers and stayed with them overnight. The following day, we left and came to Caesarea, where we went to the home of Philip, the proclaimer of the good news, one of the 7, and stayed with them. We had 4 unmarried daughters with the gift of prophecy. While we were staying there, a prophet named Agav came down from Yehuda to visit us. He took Shaul's belt, tied up his hands and feet, and said, "Here is what the Ruach HaKodesh says. The man who owns this belt, the Judeans in Jerusalem, will tie him up just like this and hand him over to the Gentiles." When we heard this, both we and the people were begged him not to go to Jerusalem. But Shaul answered, What are you doing, crying and trying to weaken my resolve? I'm prepared not only to be tied up, but even to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Yeshua. And when he would not be convinced, we said, "May the Lord's will be done," and kept quiet. So at the end of our stay, we packed and went up to Jerusalem. With us went some of the Talmudim from Caesarea. They brought us to the home of the man whom we were to stay, Manson, from Cyprus, who had been a Talmud since the early days. In Jerusalem, the brothers received us warmly. The next day, Shaul and the rest of us went to see Yaakov, and all the elders were present. After greeting them, Shaul described in detail each of these things God had done among the Gentiles through his efforts. On hearing it, they praised God, but they also said to him, "You see, brother, how many tens of thousands of believers are among you Judeans, and they are all zealots for the Torah? Now what they have been told about you is that you are teaching all the Jews living among the Gentiles to apostatize from Moshe, telling them not to have Brit Milah for their sons and not to follow the traditions. What then is to be done? They will certainly hear that you have come. So do what we tell you. We have 4 men who are under a vow. Take them with you, be purified with them, and pay the expenses connected with having their heads shaved. Then everyone will know that there is nothing of these rumors which you have heard about, but that, on the contrary, you yourself stay in line and keep the Torah. However, in regard to the Gentiles who have come to trust in Yeshua, we all joined in writing them a letter with our decision that they should abstain from what had been sacrificed to idols, from blood, from what is strangled, and from fornication. The next day Shaul took the men, purified himself along with them and entered the temple to give notice of when the period of purification would be finished and offering would be made for each of them. The 7 days were almost up, and when some unbelieving Jews from the province of Asia saw him in the temple, stirred up all the crowds and grabbed him. "Men of Israel, help!" they shouted. "This is the man who goes everywhere teaching everything about all the things against the people, against the Torah, and against this place. And now he has even brought some Gentiles into the temple and defiled this holy place." They had previously seen Trophimus from Ephesus in the city with him and assumed that Shaul had brought him into the temple. The whole city was aroused. The people came running from all over. They seized Shaul and dragged him out of the temple, and at once the gates were shut. But while they were attempting to kill him, word reached the commander of the Roman battalion that all Jerusalem was in a turmoil. Immediately he took officers and soldiers and charged down upon them. As soon as they saw the commander, they quit beating Shaul. But the commander came up, arrested him, and ordered him to be tied up with 2 chains. He asked who he was and what he had done. Everyone in the crowd shouted something different, so since he couldn't find out what had happened because of the uproar, he ordered him to be brought to the barracks. When Shaul got to the steps, he actually had to be carried by the soldiers because the mob was so wild. The crowd kept following and screaming, "Kill him!" As Shaul was about to be brought into the barracks, he said to the commander, "It is still all right if I say something to you." The commander said, "You know Greek? Say, aren't you an Egyptian who tried to start a revolution a while back and led 4,000 armed terrorists into the desert?" Shaul said, "I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of the important city, and I ask you permission to let me speak to the people." Having received permission, Shaul stood on the steps and motioned with his hands to the people. When they finally became still, he addressed them in Hebrew.